And especially if they're on the third floor, I just stand on the first floor. Hey! So if I do need to get louder, I can. So thank you, everybody. It's just a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited. So first time in Vancouver, first time in Canada, actually. So as Teresa Dramatic told me, I'm no longer a Canadian virgin. So I'm from Columbus, Ohio. So I've been living there with her for college and just kind of never left. So I'll say Buckeyes if anybody is familiar with them. So, but as Mary was saying, I do have a varied background. So I've worked in the analysis space. I've worked as a project manager and worked as an availability manager, ISO processes. I've now more recently in the past 5 years been heavily involved with the Agile and the Agile community, and that's where I started getting more into the coaching aspects of it. So I'll try to, as we go through some of the information, I'll have some exercises for you guys to do, and I'll try to share some of my failures so that you can learn from them. But first off, I'm learning to use the clicker too. So why are we discussing culture? Well, the big reason for us discussing culture here today is because the last 2 years, if you're familiar with version 1 of the sponsors, they just State of Agile survey. And for the past 2 years running, the #1 barrier to further adoption for Agile has been the organizational culture. And then if you look, also you can see that just general resistance to change is right up there as well. So we'll be talking about change management a little bit as well, and just some of the things that you want to be considering and thinking about as you are going out and implementing Agile into the organizations. So some of the things that we'll be talking about are, looking at your organization from a new perspective. So you'll have an opportunity to kind of do a little bit of reflection there. We'll talk about culture, change management. We'll look at some different tools that will help you to understand your culture a little bit better. And there'll be some resources and everything too in your package. I think I listed a couple for you. And then we'll start looking at how can you incorporate organizational change plans into your Agile transformation roadmaps. So first off, we're going to start with your organization. So I have an exercise for you in your packets. If you could just take a couple minutes and think about your current Agile implementation and describe it. If you were going to tell me what you did or what it's about, why you did it, just take a couple minutes and write that down. So look at what you just wrote. Think about the language that you're using when describing your Agile implementation. How many times did you list an Agile value or a principle? And then think about, look at how many times did you actually talk about methods, tools, and techniques? What do you guys notice when you're describing your implementations? Who is leaning more towards discussing the Agile values? Who described their tools and techniques? Most of you. So, and that's pretty common, right? So if you're in an organization and someone asks you what's Agile, a lot of times you're actually talking about the tools and the techniques and the methods that you're using. But when you look at the actual manifesto, it's really an idea. It's an idea that's supported by values and principles. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is so that you can start thinking of it in just a little bit of a different way, different context here. If I'm only focused on what the process is that I'm using and the tools and the techniques, this is what we like to say is, I'm doing Agile. I'm doing it. Now, with doing Agile, you may also, being Agile, incorporating the ideas and the values, but many times I've seen in organizations where we're doing Agile, but we're not being Agile. And I've seen waterfall projects who were actually using the values and the principles and incorporating that into a phase, so they were being more Agile than an Agile team that was doing Agile. And part of this, and why I want you to think about this, is because it kind of leads into the next topic here. What do you really want? As an organization, if you're coming up against cultural barriers, well, what was your goal in the first place? Were you looking to do Agile or be Agile? And this comes into two words that get used interchangeably a lot. Am I doing an Agile adoption or am I doing an Agile transformation? hear so many times interchangeably these words are used, but really they have a distinct meaning. I'm adopting practices. I'm not maybe modifying my process. I'm introducing, and I'm adopting new practices and ways that I'm working. But if I'm transforming, I'm actually changing the way that I think. So I'm moving towards that agile mindset. If you're getting resistance within your organization, what was sold to the leadership? Were they prepared for what happens when you transform mindset? Now, and we're not going to do it here, but if you want to do it, I listed for your exercise 2. You've got the manifesto and the Declaration of Interdependence. Maybe during the open space time, you can just read through that and check which ones is your organization subscribing to. So then we have a little bit of a distinction between the difference of doing and being agile. And what does that mean from an actual transformation perspective or adoption? We can actually start talking a little bit about this organizational change. And basically, first let's look at what's change management. Change management is just an approach to transition, whether it be people, an entire group, or an entire organization, from one state to another state. So this is something, whether you're doing action, you're maybe transforming a group from using one process to the next, but you also could be transforming the culture. And again, neither one of those there's not a good or a bad, whether you want to do an adoption or you want to do a transformation, or if you're doing agile or you're doing one's not better than the other. It's really based off of what makes sense for your organization, which is tied into what's your organization strategy. And we'll talk a little bit about leadership styles as well when we talk about culture. So as we're looking at change management, there are different ingredients that you want to be cognizant of. So as part of change management, there's usually some kind of a vision. We're here and we want to be there. There's usually some kind of skills that will be needed by the individuals within the organization to transform or to move from state A to state B. A lot of times you need some kind of incentives so that you can motivate, put some kind of motivations in place. You want to make sure people have the right resources. You have money for the training or the tools that are needed or whatever is needed to get from state A to state B. And then you want to have an action plan. So what can happen if something is missing? So if I'm with an organization and there's no vision, the vision box is missing, you're going to have confusion in the organization. People aren't really understanding, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? And it's very hard to change from one state to the next state without a clear vision. And your vision, really needs to come from the top down in many cases. The next thing is if I'm missing skills. So maybe we have a vision. There's been a great vision articulated in our organization, but there's been great incentives, we've got all the resources, and there's even an action plan, but as individuals, we don't have the skills. So there's this anxiety that starts to increase. It's like, oh, well, I know where I want to go, and I know why I want to get there, but I don't know how. So you want to look at that as one of the things, and we'll talk about some different tools that will help with these. So then maybe you are lacking incentives. So if we're lacking incentives, you may find some resistance. People don't understand what's in it for them, right? It's probably going to change, and even if I'm giving you the skills or you have the skills, but there's really no reason to, you may get some resistance that way. If you have where your resources are missing, so you've got everything else, there aren't any resources. The funds haven't been provided, the individuals that you need, maybe the trainers or whatever, maybe the tools you need aren't there, then you're going to have frustration. It's like, okay, I know where I want to go, I have the skills I need, but I don't have the tools that I need or the actual SMEs on my project or something. So there's frustration. And then if we're missing the action plan, We have all the other ingredients and all the action plan. That's when you just sit on that treadmill, right? You just keep spinning and spinning. Your project can't seem to move forward because you're actually missing the action plan. So we'll talk about some different tools and techniques to help with each of these areas. Any questions? Yes?
I mean, just wondering if you have a copy of that or if you can get that. I'm just trying to make sure that it's in the schools. Do you have that somewhere?
Are they PDFs? Are they available?
We can post PDFs of not only these, but all the speakers online.
Okay.
And so those are not part of what we've got already, but I'll collect it from you.
Okay.
And then we'll post the slides as well, if that's okay.
You can get that question for you.
Okay, great. And where did this long come from?
This actually came from, so there's other coaches that I work with. So in Columbus, we have a very big Agile community in Columbus, Ohio. And so a lot of the coaches we get together and share ideas. And so one of my colleagues had, I'm not sure where it originally originated. He's like, you can share this. I was like, I love that. And it fits with some of the other things that we're talking about. Excellent. So what is organizational culture? We talked a little bit about what changes. What is culture? I like to think of culture very similar to the 100-year-old Chinese soup, right? So culture can help your strategy or can hinder your strategy as an organization. And how does it get created? Well, if you think of this 100-year-old soup, back in the day, there was the village pot. And all the villagers would bring whatever ingredients they happened to have available for the day and put it into the pot. They would cook the soup for the day. Everybody would have an opportunity to eat from the soup, but the soup didn't get finished to the bottom. So the next day, whatever ingredients were available, you add back to the soup pot. You cook it, and you eat. There's again some left over. So after 100 years, when you take a bite of that soup, you really don't know. There could be the possibility that some ingredient in that soup's from 100 years ago. Well, your organization is very similar. It is comprised of the values and the beliefs and the habits and routines of all the people who have come and left that organization. Some things have stuck, some things have been altered. So it's a compilation of all of those individuals that have come and gone, similar to the soup. Now, this is why it's very difficult to change. If I were to take out my pot of soup and scrub the pot down and try to recreate it from scratch, it'll be a completely different soup because it's missing all of those other ingredients. Well, it's very hard to just stop an organization, throw everybody out, and then start a new one, right? That usually doesn't work. So what ends up happening is we have to find other ways to introduce maybe some different ingredients in there if we want to change the way that that soup tastes or that organization operates. And so with that, that's where it's not something that usually happens overnight. If you're really looking to do a transformation of your organization, if that's truly what the end goal is, it takes about 8 quarters to really be able to go from point A to point B from a transformation to get that culture to change. Okay, this isn't a large organization. If you're in a small one, you can see a little bit quicker. There are ways where you just sometimes have to remove people when it start over, kind of like dumping out the soup and filling it in with new ingredients. But just keep that in mind when you're looking at what is it you really want to do as part of your transformation, if that's where you're really going. That it's all of those individuals in there that you have to understand what are their needs, what are their beliefs, where are they today personally? Is there something that's going on with them and you're introducing a change and maybe it has them scared? And if they're scared, they're going to resist the changes that you're bringing in because they're thinking of maybe their family. I've got a family to feed or things like that. So this is where culture is complex. Yes?
I've heard that before, that orders thing to institute a change. Where's that come from, that concept? How do you get senior leaders to buy into it?
So if you're going with an organization, so I've had examples where we started grassroots and then we just hit resistance all the way around. You know, and so if you really want to have a change, you really do need to start at the top. And so for organizations where I had more success, that's where we actually started at the top. So I've got it's a small company that I'm working with right now, but it started with the board and then went to the CEO. And so I spent time working with layers before I even touched the team themselves. So I don't know if anybody has other examples, but typically, if you want to do a transformation, you have to have that senior level sponsorship. They have to understand what does it really mean for the organization. Else you're going to just hit resistance everywhere. Does anybody have a different experience? Any hecklers in the back?
Yeah, I think it's essential to have executive buy-in in a larger organization. Only because, you know, my experience is that middle management is going to be your largest problem trying to transform an organization. You know, places where their power base is based on head count or things like that. And once you start asking them to let go and let the teams flourish, if you don't have somebody at a higher level who can build the room that you need to make that flourish and to make that successful, it's going to backfire over time. So it is possible to start grassroots and build enough inertia and enough successes that senior management does take notice. But if they don't understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, and furthermore, how you can go deeper, if they don't really understand the values and principles of what you're trying to accomplish, and then it's going to be short-sighted. The very next project, they're going to come and say, okay, great, I love everything we did. Now, here's all these requirements. When can you give it to me? You know, so you need that executive buy-in.
And that's where we start looking at what's the culture of the organization. So William Snyder, his book right here, Re-Engineering Alternative, had come up with this model from a cultural perspective. And this is in your package too. And so it's a great model to think about. Like, where are you right now today? You can look at some of the keywords and understand. But the model itself, you kind of have the two axes. You've got the horizontal axis. So if we're over here on the side, this is a very people-oriented organization. We focus on the people. When we get over to this side, it's more company-oriented or process-oriented. At the top of the vertical axis, we've got more reality. I like to think of it as, here's the actual current state focus. And when you get down here to the bottom of the vertical axis, you're looking at the possibility, so you're future-oriented. And so from a cultural perspective, most organizations will have one of these quadrants that is more dominant for them. So if I'm in a control organization, I'm trying to keep control. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there can be very valid reasons. If you think about, a lot of times the military is kind of conceived as very hierarchical. You follow a chain of command. If you're looking at a more collaborative culture, this is where we tend to be about the team working together. If I'm here in a cultivation, I'm looking at growing people. We're trying to always improve. It's more about self-actualization. And if I'm over here in competence, it's about being the best. We're really driven to be the best. Now, where you start seeing conflicts is when you start looking at cross diagonals here. So if I've got collaboration and control, they're both actual oriented. One's just more around people, one's more around the process. I go, here, collaboration and cultivation, they're both about people, but one likes to live in the current state, and one likes to be a little more future oriented. And you can come over here, same, not having clicking the wrong buttons. But over here too, you can see, from the control, these are both process-oriented, but this is around there. This one here is around the reality, what is the process, keep my hands in place. First, my competence is, I want to do this. So, one of my friends, Michael Sahota, put together, it's a great guide, it has all kinds of rooms. you go to his online version of his book, it's actually free. You can download it. I put the URL. But he has a link to more information about this model and a bunch of other models if anybody wants to really dive down a bit deeper. But it's important to understand where you are. And within an organization, as I was saying, there's usually a dominant, but it doesn't mean the other cultures don't exist. So they can exist to support the dominant culture. So you could have a culture that would be tolerated. So if you're introducing, say you're in a really controlled environment, and you're introducing maybe some techniques, but they fundamentally, the premise of those, they would support some collaboration, so long as it actually helps with predictability, let's say. So this is where, what's that sound like? We can collaborate, but fundamentally trying to do predictability, well, maybe using some Kanban in here, right? We visualize our work, we start looking at our lead time, we're trying to control and shrink our lead time, we want to get to predictability when something new comes in. So you can have Kanban pretty easily in a more controlled culture. But if you throw Scrum in there, ooh, things start shaking up a little bit. At least I've seen that in mine. Because it's fundamentally a different way of thinking. The balance of who actually has the control changes a little bit. And where the power lies. So, any questions on kind of how to read this? And you have an exercise as well where you can kind of just look at these and see which words sound like your group compared to maybe some of the other groups that you're working with. Now, from an Agile perspective, there was a survey done in 2010 that says, what does an Agile culture look like? And what we found in Agile culture is highly collaborative. So a collaboration culture is actually, so the collaboration actually came up as the highest respondent saying that's the type of culture where Agile thrived. And what we also found out is that cultivation culture, so growing people, was the secondary culture, and the second most popular. And you see control was really small and competence wasn't much bigger. So I mentioned earlier that your culture needs to support your strategy, right? Well, also the leadership style is important to understand. How many times have you been in, whether yourself, as the leader coming into an organization, or you've seen leaders who've come into the organization, and then all of a sudden, like a couple months later, they're like ready to leave, right? Their personal style as a leader didn't mesh with the dominant culture. And that happens. Because a lot of times when you're interviewing, you're talking to, the peers, and you're saying, hey, I think I want to work here. If you don't ask the right types of questions, you could end up in a cultural mismatch. Now, there are different options. If you're just looking to, say you're coming in to do a transfer, to do some kind of natural implementation, you didn't ask the right questions, and somebody is a control culture, but you're very cultivating, and you're coming in and, hey, we're going to have these retrospectives, and we're going to be constantly improving, and the team around you and the leadership around you is really directive and authoritative, and they want you to follow the process. Ooh, they want people who know what they're doing right away. You start running into that mismatch. Now you can choose to adapt your style as a leader to mesh with the culture. May or may not be a good choice, because what if that culture isn't really supporting the strategy of the organization? Well, if it's not, maybe that's why you were brought in, to change that organization. So understanding who you're working with and what motivates them, and understanding what type of a leader you are, will help you to be able to adapt into the situation. And I'll show you a tool that I kind of modify where this becomes important. But here, if we're looking at a directive type of a leader, they're authoritative, they're more conservative, they're realists. If you look at your participative leadership styles, they're more focused on coaching and team building, and we're going to work together as a team to meet our goals and our objectives. And then if we're looking at the charismatic type someone who comes in, they're a catalyst, they're very people-oriented, and, you know, they're going to be your idealists. And then you've got your standard setters. So these are the ones who are like your taskmasters. Yeah, any key on something? Check, 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 check. So, and the reason I bring this up is because this actually fits in well with the cultures. So get this, like, they're kind of color-coded for you a little bit. So a control culture, a leader that's very directive, does really well in a control culture because their values match with the values and the beliefs of that particular organization. If I'm more achievement-oriented or a standard setter, competence, being the best, fits very well with my values as a leader in that type of an organization. And again, doesn't matter, it's not good or bad, it just doesn't fit together to meet the strategy of the organization. If I'm charismatic and I'm really about self-actualization, well then a cultivation culture is ideal for me as a leader. And here, our number one agile area, if I'm a participative leader and about the affiliation in a group, then I fit very well in a collaboration culture. And again, same axes here. Rub those over. So what happens when I'm trying to move? So let's say you want to transform, and I currently have a competence culture, and I want to move over here to a collaboration culture. They're diagonals. I'm trying to change two axes. I'm trying to move a group, not only from possibility up to a more current state reality oriented, but I'm also trying to change them from company orientation to a people orientation. That's hard. That's a hard sell. It can be done, but you need to have that mind because you're really changing how people relate with each other and how the organization is thinking about things. So anytime you go diagonal, whether it's from control, cultivation, competence to collaboration, those are going to be your biggest resistance because there's not much commonality there. And in some cases, it just may make sense to not try to transform. If I've got, I'm here or I'm trying to be here, but I'm working with another group, we have subcultures, so other groups within your organization could have a different type of a culture. If really my culture is one of these and I'm trying to come out a diagonal, I may just want to put a buffer in. It's the whole concept of type 1 Buddha and type 2 Buddha. Type 2 you can get rid of right away, but type 1, you keep it in there because it has a value. Even if it's kind of a wasted effort, you may want to keep it. And so one example could be that if you're looking at an organization and the expectation is you as a manager are going to provide feedback on each one of your team members. Well, if you're trying to have where the team supports each other and really the team grades each other, you may have to put a buffer layer in there where, well, let's let the team do each other's reviews and, and say, hey, hold each other accountable and help each other grow and stuff. Then get that rolled up into that report. And you may still have to have a manager deliver the report up because that's the expectation. So that's creating a buffer in there. That's just a little bit different than how you really, your ideal state would be if you were just an agile team working with each other. Because HR maybe runs or something. How am I on time? I'm sorry? I'm halfway. Okay. So the next thing, we're going to talk about some tools and techniques. So we learned just a little bit about what culture is. You've got some resources you can go read. Talk a little bit about change management. So how do I know where I am right now? And how do I know, talk about maybe where I am or where I'm going to be. But who are my stakeholders? How do I know that I have the right stakeholders? Have you sat and thought about who your stakeholders are and actually map them out? And we're going to do that. Did you look at the type of culture? Understand what type of a culture you have? Okay, what type of culture of your stakeholders and their groups? And understand the lay of the land. And their leadership styles. And then are they really prepared? If you're looking to make a change from a transformation, which is the being, the mindset, or changing the culture, are they ready for what that means for them? The balance of power may be shifting for them if they're not already in a collaborative environment. So one of the first things do is a business context diagram. Have you used these? Has anybody here done requirements and used business context diagrams? Yes. So for those who aren't as familiar, basically, if you're doing this for a project, in the center you can kind of put whatever it is that you're creating, like the business change that you're making. And then, you know, you would say, okay, what are all the impacted business units? So we can take that same type of a model, put your group in the middle, you know, the team that's going to be making changes. And this could be whether it's the actual IL team itself, or maybe you'll put a transformation committee together who's going to be going out to do the influencing amongst the organization. Put them here in the center, and then look at who do I have to interact with for this to be successful? And start listing out in little bubbles. And then start listing what are the types of interactions that I have with those particular groups. Why is it important that I interact with each group? You know, what kind of things do we share? What could possibly be changing? You know, what are processes maybe? You know, what are those interactions? Then what I like to do with this when I'm looking at it from a transformation process is just kind of, even if you don't know 100%, look at your model, your Schneider model, and just think, well, what are some of the keywords that describes that organization? When I think of that group, and if I have somebody who actually I'm close with in that group, I may actually sit down with them and ask them, hey, you know, what sounds more like how your group interacts on a day-to-day basis to get a little bit of an understanding, and then you can color code your context diagram. And so here in this one, it's kind of hard to tell a little bit, but these ones are orange, so we're assuming that I'm already collaborative. I've got a cultivation group over here, I've got a rent control group over here, and then I've got two competence dominant cultures. And so based off of that, if I'm looking at this diagram, what do you see about my environment and the groups that I'm interacting with if I'm doing a transformation? What do I have my work cut out for me? Based off my prior slide, where's my work cut out for me? I'm here. Yeah, there's competence people down here. These are my software customers. But no, but really, here's going to be my challenge, because the competence is about, I want to be the best, right? And it's not about collaborating necessarily, it's about being the best. And so, depending on what I'm doing and what kind of change I'm making, that's probably going to be one of my areas of challenge. If for some reason I'm going to be changing the way this group here and this group as part of my changes are interacting, I could have some other conflicts that may come up. If I have to start bringing those two groups together and they fundamentally think about things differently, then in the meetings where you've got the people on the opposite ends of the spectrum, it can get sometimes pretty heated, but you have to be willing to accept that and understand that. And so this is just a way to recognize it. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe it just makes sense that we draw a little adapter or a translator to kind of buffer off that group. Because maybe the leadership over there is just not ready. They're not supporting what we're trying to do. So in that particular case, maybe you've got a PMO office that's requiring that you do a Microsoft project plan. We're all about putting it up on the wall, and you can come see what's going on. No, I needed this plan, it's got to feed into the corporate financials. Back to our real type 1, you may have to have a little bit of extra overhead to create that Microsoft project plan, though it adds no value. It's what you and your team are doing. But you may have to do it, and that would just be your adapter that you would create in here. And that may be the safest bet. Then you can work on focusing the rest of the organization and then tackle that later, like maybe as a Q8, your 8th quarter. Yes?
In there.
Yeah. Yes, I have a fun person too. But it's easier than arguing about it. It's like pick your battles, right? At least with me with children, pick my battles. You know, which one am I going to argue about what? Sometimes I just give in. So this would be a case where maybe you would want to give in temporarily. But as part of your transformation, you recognize you have more work to do here. Maybe you need to wait because there's a leadership change coming. And maybe the new leadership would have a different mindset that's more suitable transformations, because they take so much longer, it's because of some of these types of things that we can really transform the whole organization. You can't tackle it all at once. Prioritize, inspect the decks, right? So here's another tool that I think is really neat. Has anybody heard of net mapping? So one of my friends out of DC, she actually got an award for this contest. It's a different way of looking at your organization, and then I've taken her net map and color coded it, so I have a layer on top of that. But if we look here, so we have a question: who's going to help my agile transformation and help it be successful? Now, the technique I'm going to show you, you can actually do this with anything. She and I did this with my daughter and her girlfriend about a bake sale. Who's going to help my fundraiser be successful because she wanted to go on a DC trip. So we did this, and it's a similar concept. So you don't have to use it on an agile, but you can. Same thing with the business context diagram, it's just any project, waterfall or not. But here in this case, there's you, and you've got Dave as a manager. And again, it's kind of hard to tell, but you're orange, he's green. And then you've got a team that's matrixed into you. So you got Sarah, Chuck, and Sue. And you kind of see my legend over on the side. And so Dave and Sue report to Bob directly. And Dave is a peer of John. And the reason you hear is Sarah and Chuck report to John, so you interact with him. Now, John's got a boss, Kelly. And Kelly's a peer of Bob. And there's also this other peer of Bob's called Fred. Now, Fred happens to have Mike, who's a peer of Sue. And we start then looking at who's friends with who in this network. Because this is your social network. Net mapping is about looking at your social network. So now you've got you and Dave, who happen to be friends with Bob. Now, Dave actually, as we've mentioned, reports to Bob, but he's also that they go hang out and have drinks together with friends. And you are also friends with John. And Dave and Kelly don't get along too well in this instance. I'm sorry. Trying to find out the best place to stand him and color video. But we see Fred is actually friends with Kelly. So in this case, I'm looking at, this is my social network, and I've color-coded them based off of their leadership styles. So Fred and Mike and Sarah and myself, or you in this case, are all very collaborative. Mr. You like a collaborative environment here. And you've got some people that are compatible, but you and Chuck reports to you, and Chuck's about being the best, and Chuck really has like a different agenda here. He's like, I'm getting my experience, but I'm really ready to check out what this was. But in here, you can change, like maybe there's people who, if you're in a large organization, people that are married to each other may show up in here as a different color line. Somebody dated somebody or used to date. Maybe somebody used to report to somebody, doesn't anymore. You can make up as many items in the legend as make sense for your environment. Because again, it's your social environment. So the next thing that you would do in a net mapping is you can use checkers, you can do Lego, you can do whatever makes sense. And you do this as a team. So the value is not so much this end diagram, but it's actually the discussions that you have with your team. So you lay this all out on, and draw this on like white food chart paper. Just put it all down, draw who's what. Then you just have a discussion about each one of these individuals. Here's my network. Who has the power to help me be successful? And you look at this from who has the power on positive to make it successful, but you also want to look at it from who can have the influence to not make it successful. Now, it doesn't mean that not success, it's not that they're against you personally or against Agile personally. It could be that, you know what, they've got other priorities. Their goals and objectives for the year are completely different than the goals and objectives of what you're trying to accomplish with this Agile transformation. And so maybe they have the power to take the resources that you need, take the funding money that you need. So it's not just a good and bad, positive, negative aspect, but it's just power to influence. So in this case, And so here I am, and I'm looking at, this is me. I'm like, well, who am I surrounded by? There's some positives, Chuck's negative, but his boss is neutral, and I'm friends with his boss. You know, he'll get Chuck to play along with me, so I could probably neutralize that one pretty easily. But you know, this Kelly, what am I going to do about Kelly? How am I going to get Kelly on board? Oh, yeah, look at Fred up there. Fred is friends with Kelly. And Fred has a lot of positive influence, maybe even some possible resources. So I'm not directly connected to Fred. Neither is my boss. But we're good friends with Bob, who's connected to Fred. So in this case, what you would want to do, start building connection between you and Fred. What's it going to take? That may be, Fred may be something that you want actually on your sponsor committee for your project. And you're like, hey, I'm going to do this transformation and I need some sponsors. But you're collaborative, right? You've got positive influence here. So you get what we're doing and why we're trying to do it. Can you come join us? Can you help us? And then you can have Fred use his influence to help Kelly and neutralize that a little bit. Does that make sense? The way you can use this? You think that's something you could take back? You have the opportunity to create your own in one of the exercises. Yes?
Just a question, I want to check if you've got different experience. In Agile, we're always about transparency and openness. This is a private tool.
It doesn't have to be. If you're looking at it as positive and negative in a good or bad way, I think you would probably see it as a private tool, but you're doing this with your teams, with your committees, and for me, I can go to a friend and say, look, you know what? I'm looking at this, Kelly has these agendas, it doesn't, you know, these things are going on, and Kelly's world, this again is about what is the reality for Kelly. So here, Kelly's got XYZ, it doesn't support what we're trying to do. And Fred, you know, like, give you I would have a conversation that I need Fred's help with that. And even with Kelly, then when we go to talk to Kelly, or Fred talks to Kelly, it was like, hey, we were looking at this and we realized your project's over here, you know, you're looking at these resources and stuff.
If it goes hand in hand with the conversation, I'm with you, but it's not something I'll put up on the wall.
Probably wouldn't put it on the wall, but yeah, but it's something to help you as a team to really understand and then talk about it. So.
This is a political, the organization is inherently political. And Agile tries to make it less. I'm in agreement with you that this is private, so I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with your ratings for everyone? You just knew, oh, this is the reasoning for supporting the project versus the reasoning that they might not come on board with it?
Yeah, that's a discussion. That's a discussion with you as a team. It's arbitrary to whatever your team thinks and what information they know.
I think it's a great tool for like just having, as you say, facilitating conversation in order to develop a strategy. I mean, if you're going after world domination, you basically become on the same spot. If you're trying to figure out how to move the organization forward and you're using it for good intent, then I don't see that there's anything like, you know, maybe it's all about your intent and how you work with your team. And you might want to keep this private amongst your team, but you might also want to make it transparent. So I think it really depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. But I think it's great. It's visual, you can shoot an ability to map it out and score it. So you can see it.
There's another.
Yeah, I've got a little bit lost, I'm sorry. The plus and minus that we have there. Is that, those values are a function of your assessment of them, or is it a function of the connections?
It is a function of the assessment of that individual and where they stand with relation to that question.
Right, okay, so it has nothing to do with Kelly's connections with Dave and John and Bob. Kelly is what I said.
Yeah, can Kelly help my transformation be successful? Well, in this case, Kelly's got other projects that are competing for the same resources. There's a lot of influence in Kelly, so it's taking away from what I need. So now that's and I want to bring in some allies to help me potentially. Yes.
Have you ever had a situation where you weren't able to identify the facilitator or is positive and negative?
You make some assumptions there based off, that's where the team comes in, is the collective whole. You know, I may not know, because I don't know the individuals, I may be new to the organization, but then I ask others, hey, I think this person, you know, what are their perspectives? And you understand, try to figure out what their styles are, and try to understand, you know, are they really in with the CEO or they're not? You know, or, you know, where are they? You know, again, it's the political, you can use it as a political tool. I mean, it's one use of it, but you don't necessarily know, and it may change, because over time, as people talk to each other, you're trying to influence here. It's just like, who do I want to target and influence? And it changes over time. Do you have a, thank you. There's another tool, I didn't bring it in here, but it's kind of a similar concept, that's ProSci. They do a lot of change management, and have a tool from them here, where you draw out your sponsors from, if you're looking at doing any type of change, you use that for sponsors, and it's very similar. The color code your sponsors, in that case, on a red, yellow, green, on where they are on that score. And that allows you, which we'll talk about next. So it's, again, there are tools you can use. It's as transparent as you're comfortable. I'm a pretty transparent person. Just be in trouble sometimes, but you know, I'm a pretty transparent person. Any other questions on, but do you understand how to use it? And again, while you're here, you can maybe start mapping out some of yours in your organization, and then go back and have the conversation with your team. Yes?
Would it be okay if I add one thing to it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in addition to finding the folks who you can influence, I think it's just as important, if your goal is to change the culture, to deal with the people that you can't, and the people that are going to be very vocally negative against what you're doing. And because there will be some, there's no doubt there will be some. And so what I have done very frequently is talk to those individuals, pull them aside and say, hey, you know, I know and understand you have your views, and I'm not going to try to change your opinion, you know, because they're founded on your experience. But, you know, you're cheating most of the people who are undecided, in that you're not giving them the opportunity to experience this and make their own decision. And, you know, and often I find that if you just have some of those frank talks with them, if they're very vocal or very, you know, outgoing, that they will start to step back and allow those, you know, 70% of the people who are kind of in the middle trying to decide which way to go with the cultural changes, to let them experience it themselves. So I think in addition to finding out who you want to influence to bring about, you also need to kind of, this is going to sound really harsh, but you also need to learn who to silence. Because a negative person, especially if they're very vocal, very influential, can have a huge effect on the effort to try to transform an organization and transform a culture. I don't know, David, have you had similar experiences?
Yeah.
Yes.
From experience from not managing to find
Yes.
the downside of it.
You have a question?
I was just wondering if you've used, like, I think it's great, you've got individual names. Have you ever used it with sort of in a bigger systems where you're looking at your whole organization, looking at departments and doing it, and then overlaying, I know that you talked about some people need training, some people might need some incentives, but could you also use this as a way to sort of map out the grand scale?
You can adjust it however, you know, if you want to say these were different groups and how the groups interact with each other. I like to use the context diagram partly for that, but this kind of leads into the next tool, which is the ad card tool. And so this is a nice tool to use because you can take ad card comes from ProSci, it's on here too. It's a change management. It's like a whole suite of tools and techniques and processes that you can use from a change management perspective. But basically what you're looking at is where are people from awareness, from a desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. With awareness, this is just, are they aware of the change? Are they aware of the risks of not making that change? Right? Because it may just be, they don't understand why. Because they just don't understand, you know, they just don't know. So there's awareness. Desire is, well, what's in it for me? Do I have the desire to support it? You don't have to necessarily, but do I at least, it's a consensus, do I at least agree to support it? Knowledge, this is where, you know, the skills, the training, is there information even available about the change that we're trying to make? Are we trying to do something brand new? There really isn't anything out there. What kind of knowledge is out there that I can help the individual or the group with this change? Then there's the ability. So now we're looking at, as an individual or as a group, do I have the mental capacity? Do I have the physical capacity to actually, you know, create or go along with whatever change is happening? And then reinforcement is the ability to sustain this change. So when you're looking at reinforcing, it's, well, go back to this consensus that we created earlier, right? And if I am actually going out and supporting the change, am I going to get dinged by some other group, you know, that's going to then prevent me from wanting to support the change? Like one example I had was we had a team, we were moving to use, we were piloting some new collaborative, agile type of concepts. But it was during this initiate phase. It was well before we got into any actual like, stories and development, but it was a very collaborative approach. Well, there were certain deliverables, like forms that had to be filled out by the program or for the organization, and they did audits. And I had to actually go to those team members, managers in another group, and negotiate with them, saying, look, you know, there's a need that came from the organization, they want to try this new thing, but I can't have these individuals getting beat on the head when the review time comes around, right, and saying, oh, well, you didn't do this form, this form, this form, well, you just failed your assessment, well, now you don't get that raise. You know, you have to look for, well, what kind of reinforcement is out there? Because if I hadn't done that, there's no way they wanted to even try what we were trying to do. Because, well, no, I have to do this. We're not going to twice the work. They literally wanted to copy and paste everything they were doing when they were done into some form, just so that they could meet a checkbox. There was no other value to it, which is something we were trying to eliminate. So, with this though, there's actually, so if you're wondering, how do I know where somebody is from an assessment and from a desire, you can go out, there's assessment questions, or there's a book also called Edify that has in there questions that you can ask. You can survey people, get information from them to see where they are about the change that you're trying to make. Or again, as a team, if you have enough information about the individuals or the groups, you may be able to just talk amongst yourselves as a team and try to assign a score. But the thing that you want to look at is when you're looking at these letters, each one is a building block that builds on the prior one. I cannot create desire and have it, you know, move forward with my change if there isn't even awareness of what the change is. Without awareness and desire, no one's going to care about the knowledge or the ability, right? So each piece builds on the prior piece. So what you do here is when you do these assessments, you then look at, like here's just an example grid. There's anything that's at a 3 or below, that's where you want to change, or you want to focus all of your change management activities for that particular group or area until you can get it up to a 4 or a 5. So if I'm looking here, this particular group is aware of the change. Or at a 4, awareness is there. There's not necessarily a desire here. So desire at this particular case then becomes my barrier point. And so if I'm looking at transforming this particular group and changing the way they're thinking about something, well, they've got enough awareness that we're bringing the change, but they don't understand what's in it for them. So my next thing to do is to really find ways to help them understand why this is desirable and understand what their values are. Again, it goes back to, well, what are the personal, people's, what's their situation? Do they think they're going to lose their job in this case, or do they think they're not important? Maybe, they're a competence type of a mentality, and getting those certificates of being the best is very important to them. Now you're putting them on a team where they don't get to be the star and the hero anymore, right? And that's an intrinsic need to them. They like to be the star and the hero. So how do you create desire? You look for ways and you work with those individuals to help them at least accept and support what you're doing. They don't have to at least say that they will support it. Once you have that, then they'll be more open. In this case, this person has the knowledge already. There wasn't even any training needed. You just didn't understand the desire. Maybe you go out here and get more information for that tool. Let's see, next. So for creating awareness, if we don't have awareness, we find it's a lower school. Typically, that's just a communication. You know, we spend time communicating. That could be our approach from a change management perspective. Is communicating again what the change is, why we have that change. You know, what's the risk if we don't make the change. Desires where again we look at the person's situation and we look for what's in it for them. And is there a way maybe for the person who needs to feel validated? Maybe there's a way to incorporate in the team feedback and success or some way to do some kind of recognitions that make them feel good. Knowledge, this is where if someone doesn't have the knowledge or the group doesn't have the knowledge, we look at training, coaching, mentoring. This is where, this comes into play a lot of ways as coaches and practitioners who are SMEs. And ability. So maybe we're trying to make a change and we want everybody to sit in a team space, but someone has some kind of a limitation. Well, maybe we have to adapt the physical space, or maybe we have to adapt some other concepts about what we're doing to allow individuals to have that ability if maybe there was a physical reason. So if there's a mental block, like I was saying you're not good with numbers, well, you know, calculating and kind of metrics and with someone else who loves that may step up and say, I'll take care of those. And then reinforcement. Make sure you're celebrating successes. And if you are going to have any kind of award or recognition systems, make sure it's meaningful. It's not, oh, yeah, here, everybody, here's your gift card, and there's no true meaning and sincerity behind it. So whatever reinforcements you're using, just make sure that they are sincere and appropriate to whatever you're doing. So this is the one where I have some failures looking at. So performer impact assessments. I like these. If you look over here, we have some categories. So we're introducing a change to a group, and maybe that is getting close to time. Okay, so with the changes for the group, maybe they can't actually take on any more change. This particular tool will help you to determine how much change is coming in. Is there already changes hitting that organization and that work group or those individuals? Are they conflicting with what you're trying to do? How much change is coming? Because it may be that I fully support you, I've got all the knowledge and everything needed, and you're putting the right reinforcements, but I need to get 5 changes at the same time. So you can use this tool here to look at those, and you just put it in a spreadsheet. You can use these as your kind of categories and just look at each one of the groups that you're going to be interacting with off the business context diagram and just rate high, medium, low. How big is the change from people, locations, number of maybe installations if I'm changing some kind of software or computers or rolling something out. And simultaneous changes, how big of a change is it for them? Is it minor or is it big? People, process, projects, are we changing how people work? Are we changing the hierarchy? Are we changing jobs as part of this? Adding jobs, eliminating jobs? What's going on there? Are we actually changing, their behaviors and their mental models? And just rate those high, medium, low, and you can kind of give a score 1, 2, 3 for those, and then see where your biggest areas are. And so when you're looking at your transformation roadmap, and you understand each one of the impacted groups, you can maybe weigh, maybe I should delay this particular group and what I'm going to roll out to them. In the meantime, maybe put some of those buffers in there, translators, until that is a different situation with that particular group and then you're ready to take on that change. Let's see. So roadmaps versus the change plans, and the change plans actually. When you think of your roadmap, I like to think of your roadmap as the what that we're creating. It's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be introducing certain practices maybe, and I'm going to introduce those to certain groups or certain teams. And I'm looking at the big picture. I'm usually looking at quarterly views. I may even break it down to a monthly view. It's something that I would work with the leadership on, and you can just put it in a spreadsheet. It's an easy way to track it. And that's what I use right now with the transformation that I'm on. We got every quarter out, like the next 3 months out. So if we're talking about something, then maybe we find a need that comes up and emerges as I'm working with the teams and with the group. Then I say, okay, well, here's what we were thinking the next couple of quarters. We were going to introduce concept A, or we were going to move upstream in the value stream and, to the sales process and pipeline as work's coming into the organization. Oh, well, let's move that out another month or two because something else emerged that was more important. But again, it's that what at a very high level. Your change plans is where we're now looking at how. Who's going to get trained? What are they going to get trained on? What days are they going to get trained on? We're looking at the details around what type of communication am I going to send out? Who's going to get it? Who's it going to come from? Because that becomes important too. If you're talking about a major change, you want the senior leaders to talk about it. If it's something that's more personable, maybe you want the immediate managers to be delivering that information. So the change plan is where you would specify the how, and you could do these either at the monthly or at a weekly level if you choose. So at this point, we've discussed kind of, about your organization, kind of from a new perspective. Were we doing agile or are we being agile? Is our goal really to adopt or to truly transform the organization at a cultural level? We looked at what the complex change ingredients were, and we looked at the Schneider cultural model. Some of the tools that we've looked at are the business context. We've looked at net mapping. We've looked at ADCAR a little bit, and performer impact assessments. And then we kind of talked about the roadmap and the change plans and how those fit together. I think I'm out of time. Thanks for being patient as I try to run through it.